Wyoming Territory, June 1883. The sun beat down on the auction yard in Rawlins, its heat pressing hard on the crowd gathered under the open sky. Dust swirled around boot heels, and the smell of horses, sweat, and desperation hung heavy in the air. Men shouted bids, cattle bawled, and somewhere in the noise, a woman stood still as stone, her hands clenched at her sides, eyes fixed straight ahead. Her name was Almina Faye, and everything she had left in the world, two small trunks, a broken wagon axle, and the aching memory of a life that had come undone, was being sold off piece by piece to cover a debt she had not made. Next up, the woman herself, the auctioneer called, voice sharp, uncaring. Indenture service, 3 years term, young, strong, and decent with a needle, claims no husband, no ties, starting bid at $40. The crowd shifted. Men murmured. A few laughed low. Almina's jaw tightened. She did have ties, 2 of them. A boy and a girl, Bennett and Birdie, her children. The people who had taken them in when the bank claimed her land said they could not stay unless she paid her debt in full. She had not seen them in 5 months. She stood tall, shoulders squared, her dress clean even if threadbare. She did not cry. She would not give them that. The bidding began. 40, 45, 50. Almina tuned it out. She stared past the crowd, past the auctioneer, into the distance until the murmurs quieted. Boots thudded on dry earth behind her, slow and firm. The auctioneer paused. "We got a late entry here." No one turned to look. They did not have to. The silence spoke for itself. Almina felt him before she saw him, a presence like thunder rolling in slow. A cowboy stepped through the crowd, tall, broad-shouldered, dust on his coat, shadow under his hat. He did not speak. He just reached into his coat, pulled out a folded stack of bills, and held it up. The auctioneer blinked. "You paying her full debt?" The cowboy nodded once. That's $212, the auctioneer said, uncertain now. The cowboy dropped the money in the man's hand, turned to Almina, and held out his own, calloused, steady, palm up. She stared at it, breath caught in her chest. Then she looked up into his face. He did not smile. He did not speak, but his eyes were warm, dark, and sure. Something in her chest cracked. Almina placed her hand in his, and he walked her out of the auction yard without a word. They did not speak for a long while. He led her to a chestnut mare tied to a post by the edge of the yard. His own horse stood beside it, a black gelding with a white blaze. He helped her up into the saddle like she weighed nothing, then mounted his own horse and turned toward the road. Only when they had put a half hour of riding behind them, the town shrinking into the heat haze behind them, did she finally glance over. "My name is Almina," she said, voice dry from dust and silence. The man nodded. "Quillan Nash." His voice was deep, even, with a kind of quiet that felt earned. "You did not ask anything of me," she said, watching him. "You did not even speak." "I saw what I needed to," Quillan said. They rode in silence again, broken only by the rhythm of hooves and the wind rustling through grass. His homestead was 2 hours west, set against a low ridge with a creek running through it and a barn that needed paint. The house was simple, whitewashed, strong. Almina dismounted slowly, legs stiff. She looked around, unsure. Quillan led his horse into the barn, came back with a cup of water, handed it to her. "You can stay here," he said. "No obligation, just peace." "Why?" she asked. He looked at her, really looked. "Because no woman should be sold like that, and because I can." She drank the water. It tasted clean. That night, he gave her the bedroom and slept on a cot in the corner of the barn. She watched the oil lamp flicker on the windowsill and lay awake, trying to remember the last time someone had given her anything without expecting something back. Days passed. Almina swept the floors, mended a curtain, baked bread when she found flour in his cupboard. Quillan worked the land, fixed a fence, rode out early and back late. He never asked her for anything. But he always brought back something small: wildflowers, a handful of berries, once even a book. He came in quiet, left quiet, but when he looked at her, he really looked, and when she spoke, he listened. "You are not like other men," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun fall behind the ridge. "Maybe I just got tired of being like them," he said. She smiled, small and real. One morning she woke to find him saddling his horse early. I am going to Rollins, he said. Why? His jaw worked. You said you had children. Her heart stopped. Yes, he met her eyes. I will bring them home. She stood, barefoot on the porch, the wind lifting her hair. You cannot just, I can try, he said. Then he mounted up and rode. He came back 3 days later. Bennett clung to his saddle, a boy of 6 with sharp eyes and dirt on his cheeks. Birdie, 4, rode in front of him, her arms around his waist, nose buried in his coat. Almina ran to them, heart bursting. She pulled them down, gathered them close, dropped to her knees in the dirt and wept for the first time in months. Quillan dismounted, watching them quietly. When she looked up at him, tears on her face, she said, You brought my whole world back to me. He knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her cheek with one rough hand. You are my world too, he said, voice low. She reached for him, her hand sliding into his just like that first day. This time she held on tight. The children slept in the loft that first week, curled beneath patchwork quilts Almina had found in a trunk at the foot of Quillan's bed. She padded barefoot through the house each morning before sunup, listening to their small breaths, memorizing the sounds of safety. The cabin creaked softly, pine timbers settling, a stove ticking as it cooled. The place was plain but solid, and it held itself together with the same quiet resolve as the man who'd built it. On the 7th morning, she rose before the light. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and early mint. She stepped outside, wrapped in her shawl, and found Quillan already at the fence line, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled, boots sunk in dew-wet grass. He didn't look over, but she knew he'd heard her. You always work before breakfast, she asked, her voice just above the hush of wind. He kept his eyes on the post he was setting. Wood's easier to drive before the sun dries it. She walked to where he stood, brushing a curl from her forehead. You ever let someone else do their share? He set the hammer down and straightened. You mean you, she nodded. You don't owe me labor, Almina. I'm not offering it for debt, she said. I'm offering it for dignity. He met her gaze, and something shifted slow, certain. Then he passed her a mallet without answering. They worked side by side for 2 hours, hammering and bracing until the new fence line stood upright against the morning sky. Later, she stirred cornmeal in a pot while he cleaned his hands at the pump. The children chased a grasshopper past the porch, their laughter high and bright. She watched them run and said, They don't ask much about what came before. No need, Quillan said, leaning against the doorframe. They're home now. She turned, spoon in hand. They are. But that doesn't mean the past disappeared. He didn't shift his weight, didn't look away. You want to talk about it? Not yet. She stirred once more, then set the spoon down. But I will when it's time. He gave a single nod and stepped inside, the screen door clicking shut behind him. That afternoon, she found a spool of blue thread tucked into the cupboard beside the flour tin. She hadn't seen it before. She opened the drawer, found a pair of shears, and sat on the porch rail, letting the fabric of her worn dress fall over her knees. She began to stitch the hem, neat and slow. Quillan passed by with a bucket of feed, paused and watched her work. You always sew like that, real careful? I used to have a shop, she said, back in Kansas before the bank took it. He sat on the porch steps, setting the bucket beside him. You miss it? Some parts. She looked at the stitch line. Not the hours, but I liked what came of my hands. He was quiet a moment. Then, there's a spare room off the barn. Could fix it up, turn it into something. Doesn't have to sit empty, she blinked. You're offering me a space to sew? I'm offering you whatever you need to start again, he said. If that's cloth and light and a door that closes, I'll see to it. Almina folded her hands in her lap, threads still looped between her fingers. Why? You already asked that once. And I didn't get a proper answer. He looked toward the ridge, the sun dipping low behind it. When I was 21, I lost my brother in a flood. Could have saved him if I'd got there sooner. I never forgot what it felt like being too late. She didn't speak right away. Then, you think saving me balances that scale? No, I think helping you live the way you deserve is better than standing still in regret. She looked down at her needle and thread, then back up at him. I don't know what to do with someone like you. You don't have to do anything with me, he said. Just don't run from what's kind. A breeze stirred the porch curtain. From the loft window, Bennett's small voice called her name. She stood slowly. I'll think on your offer, she said. "I'll be here," he replied. That evening, she stood by the creek after the children went to bed. She watched the water move slow and steady over smooth stones, the moonlight catching in eddies. Behind her, Quillan's footsteps approached, soft against the grass. She didn't turn. "Do you ever feel like you don't belong to yourself anymore?" she asked. He stopped beside her. "I did for a long time." "How'd you get back?" "I found a place no one could take from me, built it with my hands. Waited until somebody worth sharing it with came along." She turned then, her eyes catching the silver wash of starlight. "You think that's me?" "I know it is." He didn't move to touch her, just stood there, steady and sure. Almina reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. They stayed like that until the stars wheeled overhead, silent, watching, whole. The sewing room took shape slowly. Quillan cleared out the crates and broken tack that had been stored there, laid down a plank floor where the dirt had risen through the corners, and patched the warped window glass with care. Almina gathered old flour sacks and calico scraps from the wagon shed, stretched muslin across a makeshift table, and nailed a tin lantern to the wall above it. By high summer, the room smelled of cotton and beeswax, and her fingers remembered the rhythm of the needle as if no time had passed at all. She stitched while Bertie napped and Bennett practiced whittling near the barn gate. In the quiet, she let her mind settle on color, on shape, on the feel of something growing beneath her hands. One afternoon, Quillan stepped into the doorway with a cedar box tucked beneath his arm. He offered it without ceremony. "I found it at the general store in Medicine Bow," he said. They had a few left. She opened the box carefully. Inside lay a set of steel sewing tools, all seam ripper, thimble, polished shears. Her breath caught, but she didn't speak right away. "I know the ones you've been using are dull," he said, watching her face. "Figured you shouldn't have to work around the tools." She ran a thumb along the handle of the shears. "No one's ever bought me something just because they thought I deserved it." "I didn't say deserve," he said. "You've earned more than tools." She looked up. "What else do you think I've earned?" "A life that feels like yours again." She held his gaze, then set the box gently on the table. "Then I'll make something from these. Something worth the giving." That evening, Almina and Quillan sat behind the house, where the land sloped gently toward a stand of cottonwoods. The children had fallen asleep early, worn out from chasing shadows and gathering creek stones. A breeze moved through the tall grass, cool against the day's heat. Almina picked at the seam of her sleeve, quiet for a long while before speaking. "My first husband never raised his voice," she said, "but he kept things from me, land deals, debts. He'd smile with his mouth and lie with his silence." Quillan didn't interrupt. "When he died, I learned how deep it ran. We lost everything before I knew we were even close to losing it." She glanced sideways. "I don't need rescuing, Quillan. I need truth." He nodded, slow. "I keep to myself because it's quiet, not because I've got things to hide." She watched him for a moment, then leaned back on her hands. "You ever been married?" "No, came close once. Years ago, she wanted to go back east." "I couldn't leave this land." "Do you regret it?" "I regret not telling her sooner that I wouldn't follow. Might have spared us both." Almina turned her face toward the sunset. "I don't know what kind of future I'm allowed to want." "You're allowed to want anything," he said. "You don't have to earn want." She closed her eyes against the wind. "I want to wake up knowing the ground beneath me won't shift." "You will." He said it like a promise, not a wish. Later that week, a rider came from the neighboring homestead, a widow named Mrs. Caffrey, thin and sharp-eyed, dismounted with a bundle of linens under her arm. "I heard you were sewing again," she told Almina. "I've got sheets full of tears, and I'd rather mend than buy new. If that's work you'll take." Almina nodded. "It is." Quillan had come to the porch when the rider arrived. He leaned against the post now, arms crossed, saying nothing. Mrs. Caffrey narrowed her eyes at him, then looked back at Almina. "You plan on staying long?" Almina stood straighter. "I live here." "Good," the woman said, handing over the bundle. "We could use more honest folks who know what they're doing." When the rider left, Almina carried the linens inside and set them on the work table. Quillan followed her in. "You want a sign?" he asked. "I'd call that one," she smiled without turning. "It's a start." That night she stood at the threshold of his room, one hand on the doorframe. The lamplight behind her cast a long shadow across the floor. "Will you sit with me a while?" she asked. "I don't want to go to sleep just yet." He rose from the chair by the stove, crossed the room, and held the door open wider. "You never have to ask," he said. They sat together on the edge of his bed, not touching. The quiet between them had changed shape, not empty, but waiting. Almina folded her hands in her lap. "I don't want to keep walking through my life like it's borrowed." "You're not," Quillan said. "You're building something new, and I'm here with you." She turned her head toward him. "Not because you feel you owe me. No. Because I choose you." Her breath caught, but she didn't flinch. "I choose you too," she said. "All of it, whatever's ahead." He reached for her hand, warm and steady, and she placed hers in it without hesitation. They sat there long after the lamp burned low, shadows dancing across the walls, the silence full and sure. By early August, the air held a dry stir, and the heat came up off the soil in waves. Almina kept the curtains drawn during the hottest hours, letting the house rest in a hush broken only by the soft rustle of paper patterns and the occasional creak of the stove settling. One afternoon, while Bennett practiced his letters at the table and Bertie napped with a doll stitched from old gingham, Quillan stepped in from the barn with a ledger under one arm. Dust clung to his collar, and a faint line of sweat marked his brow. He set the book down beside her sewing tin without a word. "What's this?" she asked, brushing lint from her skirt. "Cattle numbers for the fall," he said, pulling a chair closer. "And I was hoping you'd look at something." He opened the ledger to a folded sheet tucked between entries, revealing a sketch drawn in charcoal, a long, low building with wide windows and a slanted roof. The lines were rough, but the intention was clear. She leaned closer. "You draw this?" He nodded once. "Thinking of adding a second room off the side of the barn, something proper, could be a space for the children come winter, or for your work if you need more light." She touched the edge of the paper. "That's not a small thing. I never meant for this place to hold just me forever." Almina traced one line with her fingertip, then looked up. "What if I made curtains for it? The kind that let morning in but keep out the cold." "I'd like that." She folded the drawing gently and slid it back between the pages. "You plan things quiet, Quillan Nash, but you plan them well." He gave a short nod, then stood. "I'll start on the frame once the calves are marked." That evening, after the dishes were washed and the children tucked beneath their quilts, Almina stepped out to the yard. The moon hung low, casting a faint silver wash over the grass. She found Quillan near the tool shed, oiling the hinges of the gate. "I've been thinking," she said, arms wrapped around herself. He closed the tin lid and wiped his hands on a cloth. "About the shape of a future." She watched him turn, his face unreadable in the dim light. "I want to build it with you," she said. "Not just live under your roof. I want to help raise the walls, shape the days. I want to choose this life, fully." His breath caught just once a subtle shift. "I never wanted to ask for more than you were ready to give," he said. "I'm not offering because you waited. I'm offering because you've walked beside me every day since." Quillan stepped closer, slow and sure. "You ready to marry into this land, Almina Faye?" She reached up, resting her palm against his chest. "I'm ready to stand beside the man who gave me back my name." He leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. "Then we'll speak vows under the cottonwoods, simple and honest, just us and the wind." She smiled, soft and steady. "And the children," he let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years. "And the children." They stood there until the stars wheeled higher, until the crickets quieted and the last of the heat left the earth. The next morning, Bennett helped Quillan gather stones from the creek, while Bertie watched Almina cut muslin for her dress. There was no rush between any of them, just the slow certainty of a life being shaped, one choice at a time. And when the sun rose over the ridge 2 days later, casting gold across the cottonwoods, Almina stepped barefoot into the clearing, her dress unadorned but clean. The children stood close by, hands clasped. Quillan waited with his hat in hand and his heart in his eyes. They spoke no long words. They gave no promises they hadn't already lived. And when he kissed her, it tasted of creek water and summer wheat and all the quiet strength it had taken to find their way to each other. The cottonwoods had begun to yellow by the time Quillan finished laying the last row of shingles over the new room. Almina stood below with Birdie on her hip, her free hand shading her eyes as she looked up. "The roof's near perfect," she said. Quillan wiped his brow with the crook of his arm. "Ought to be. Took me long enough." Birdie reached toward him with a small grunt, and Quillan crouched to the ladder's highest rung, easing down until his boots hit the ground with a soft thud. He took the girl in his arms and turned gently so she could see where the chimney now rose clean above the rafters. "Think that'll keep you warm come snow, little bird?" he asked. She nodded solemnly and laid her cheek against his shoulder. Quillan looked to Almina. "I'll start the hearthstone tomorrow. There's a red slab up near the west ridge, could make a fine mantle." Almina smoothed a curl behind her ear. "You've already done more than most men would before winter." "I never knew how much I could do until you gave me cause to." That night, with both children asleep and the oil lamp burning low, Almina opened a narrow cedar box she had hidden beneath the bed. Inside were several pieces of hand-dyed cotton, a strip of embroidered linen, and a length of lace she had kept from Kansas wrapped in waxed paper and tied with twine. She laid the fabrics across the table and ran her hands over each, her fingers lingering. Quillan came in from the barn, coat slung over one arm. "You making something?" She looked up. "A quilt for the new room. Thought I'd use what I saved." He stepped closer, brushing dust from his sleeve. "You've kept those pieces a long time. They were meant for something better than what came before." Quillan reached down and picked up the lace, coarse at the edges but intricate in the middle. "This one looks like frost on window glass." She smiled faintly. "That's what my mother said when she gave it to me." He folded the lace back into the paper with care. "Well then, let's make sure it ends up where it belongs." Their first frost came 6 days later. Quillan rose early and lit the stove before the cold crept too deep into the corners. Bennett padded into the kitchen half asleep, rubbing his eyes. "Smoke's curling out the chimney," he said. "Means winter's coming, doesn't it?" Almina set a tin cup of warm milk on the table. "It does, but we're ready for it." Quillan ruffled the boy's hair. "We're more than ready." Before the ground froze solid, Quillan hitched the wagon and drove into Rawlins with Bennett beside him. They returned near dusk with a barrel of potatoes, sacks of flour and salt, and a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Almina waited on the porch as they unloaded. Quillan passed her the parcel without a word. Inside was a bolt of deep blue wool, richer than anything she'd laid hands on in years. "For the quilt?" he asked. She looked up at him, eyes shining. "For the first winter we'll spend together." He cupped her cheek in his hand, warm and rough, and she leaned into the touch. "We'll have many," he said. That night she stitched by lamplight while Quillan read from a volume of poetry he'd found in the bottom of a trunk. The children lay curled on the rug by the fire, their breathing slow and even. Almina's needle moved in time with the rise and fall of Quillan's voice. "You never told me you liked poetry," she said when he closed the book. He looked at her over the top of his glasses. "There's a lot you've yet to learn about me." She set the fabric down. "Then I'd best stay close." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Stay always." She nodded once, the lamp flickering in her eyes. "Always." By the time snow blanketed the ridge and the creek froze over, the new room was finished. Quillan built a wooden crib with hand-carved rails, and Almina lined it with soft muslin and a patchwork blanket. The sewing table now sat beneath a wide window, where the light lingered longest, and her work brought in enough to trade for sugar and lamp oil. They took their meals together, shared the chores, and carved their lives into the rhythm of the land. There were no more debts, no more unsure tomorrows, only days made whole by shared labor, steady hands, and the warmth of belonging. One clear night in February, with snow piled high along the eaves and wind whispering through the cottonwoods, Almina stood at the window holding Quillan's hand. "You made this," she said softly, "this life." He shook his head. "No, we made it together." She turned to him, her other hand resting over the curve of her belly. "Then let's keep building one season after the next." He kissed her then, slow and sure, with every promise already proven true. In the years that followed, the house grew by another room. The children learned their letters by firelight and rode ponies across the field come spring. Almina's sowing brought neighbors from 3 valleys over, and Quillan's cattle thrived on land that knew his touch. And every evening, no matter how long the day or how hard the work, they met on the porch as the sun dipped low, her hand in his, the world quiet around them. Because what they'd built was not just shelter against cold or hunger. It was a home stitched from trust, shaped by kindness, and made strong by love that had been chosen again and again through every quiet hour of every day.